Imagine a place often called Mini Switzerland, just a stunningly picturesque valley,
Beautiful, yeah.
and then suddenly shattered by gunfire. That's Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir, April 22nd, 2025.
A truly horrific day.
We're doing a deep dive today into that terrorist attack, an attack that claimed 28 lives, mostly Hindu tourists visiting the area.
Civilians just enjoying a holiday spot.
Exactly. And to really understand the full story, what happened, who it affected, the ripple effects, we've looked at multiple sources.
Right, we've got reporting from Al Jazeera, Wikipedia for timelines and facts, Mint, the Indian Express.
A detailed YouTube analysis from Mohawk Mangal, which was quite insightful, and also another piece from Al Jazeera providing some background on the Kashmir conflict itself.
So a range of perspectives.
Our mission here is to try and uncover the truth of this awful event, looking at all the different facets, the complexities. It's not simple.
No, it definitely isn't. And what jumps out immediately from the sources is, well, how calculated it seems.
Calculated how?
The location, Baisaran Valley near Pahalgam, very popular. You get there on foot or horseback.
Okay.
But remarkably, no armed security right there at the meadow itself, which seems odd given the context of the region.
Yeah, that is surprising. Okay, so let's maybe unpack the timeline a bit. When did this all start?
The attack kicked off around 2:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time.
Right in the afternoon.
Yeah, and it wasn't quick. It went on for about 30, maybe 40 minutes. Intense gunfire.
Wow. And the first calls for help.
Also around 2:30 p.m., apparently the wife of a Navy officer who was killed made one of the first calls.
So the alarm was raised pretty quickly then?
Yes, but the rescue helicopters, they didn't actually arrive on scene until about 3:40 p.m.
Over an hour later. That delay feels significant.
It does raise questions, certainly, about the immediate response in that specific location. You know, the terrain might play a role, but still.
And the attackers, what do we know about them?
Reports indicate 5 armed militants, Islamist militants,
Okay.
believed to be linked to the Resistance Front, TRF.
Which, as you mentioned, is generally seen as an offshoot or like a front for Lashkar-e-Taiba, LeT.
Exactly, LeT, which is of course a UN-designated terrorist group based in Pakistan.
And they were armed.
Heavily. M4 carbines, AK-47s, they were wearing military-style clothing too. Some in fatigues, one apparently in a traditional Kashmiri farang.
So they looked like soldiers almost.
Pretty much. Initial accounts suggested 3 might have opened fire, but later NIA investigations pointed toward broader LeT involvement.
NIA being India's National Investigation Agency.
Correct. And their probe suggested support, allegedly, from Pakistan's ISI and maybe even the Pakistan Army.
Really? Specific names mentioned.
Yeah, they identified 2 Pakistani nationals, Hashmi Musa, also known as Suleiman, and Ali Bai, or Talapai, as key suspects.
Okay, this next part it's deeply disturbing. The targeting. It wasn't random, was it?
No, not at all. Multiple sources, eyewitnesses, they all point to the attackers specifically targeting Hindu males.
How? What were they doing?
Asking for names, asking people their religion directly. Some survivors said they were forced to try and recite the Kalima, the Islamic Declaration of Faith.
And if they couldn't?
Well, there are horrific reports, truly awful, of some Hindu men being forced to remove trousers to check for circumcision before being shot.
Methodical and sectarian.
It absolutely signals that. It's not just about killing, it's about terrorizing and dividing along religious lines. A very worrying tactic we've seen before, sadly.
Do we have specific accounts from survivors?
Yes, tragically. Shubham Dwivedi, newly married, from Kanpur. He was reportedly the first one shot after he said he was Hindu.
Just like that.
And Navy Lieutenant Vinay Narwal, his wife apparently pleaded, said he wasn't Muslim, but he was shot multiple times.
Unbelievable.
A tourist from Pune couldn't recite the verse they demanded. He was killed. And it wasn't just Hindus targeted in that way. A Christian man from Madhya Pradesh was also killed for the same reason.
So non-Muslims generally were targets if they couldn't perform that religious act.
It appears so. Though, interestingly, one Bengali Hindu professor did survive because he was able to recite the Kalima.
Amidst all this horror, you mentioned something about local heroism.
Yes, there was. A local Muslim man, a pony operator named Syed Adil Hussain Shah.
Right, I remember reading that.
He actually tried to wrestle a gun away from one of the attackers, a moment of incredible bravery.
What happened to him?
He was killed.
Yeah.
Shot for trying to intervene. He's being remembered as a hero, and rightly so.
Absolutely. His actions really stand out against the narrative the attackers were trying to push.
Definitely. It shows this isn't about an entire community. And then there's this other detail. The attack was filmed.
Filmed. By the attacker?
No, inadvertently. By a Hindu tourist from Ahmedabad who happened to be ziplining when it all started.
Wow. Must be chilling footage.
I imagine so. And adding another layer, reports say a local zipline operator actually shouted Allahu Akbar right when the shooting began.
It's complex. Could be fear, could be something else. Hard to know the context there.
Very difficult to interpret from the outside. It just adds to the chaotic picture of those moments.
Okay, let's talk about the human cost.
Yeah.
The casualties.
It's grim. Initially, reports said 26 killed 25 tourists, 1 local.
Okay.
Later clarified slightly. Wikipedia puts it at 26 killed, still mostly tourists, but identifying one as Christian among the predominantly Hindu victims. And Syed Adil Hussein Shah, the local hero.
And injuries.
17 people injured as well, some critically.
And these people came from all over, didn't they?
Absolutely. Victims were from Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, even one person from Nepal. Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Arunachal Pradesh, Bihar, Haryana, Kerala, Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, and of course Jammu and Kashmir itself.
It's a truly national tragedy in that sense.
And it hit government personnel too. 3 officials killed, 1 each from the Indian Air Force, the Indian Navy, and the Intelligence Bureau.
That really underscores the scale. It wasn't just tourists on holiday.
No, the breadth of it is staggering.
So, after something like this, the immediate question is, who did it? Who claimed responsibility?
Well, initially, the resistance front, the TRF, did claim it.
They put out a statement.
Yes. And their justification was opposition to Indian government policies.
Yeah.
Specifically, policies allowing non-Kashmiris to settle and work there, which they framed as leading to demographic change.
Right. That's a recurring theme or concern raised by some groups there. But didn't they then backtrack?
They did, yeah. Just 4 days later, they retracted the claim.
Retracted it. Why?
Their explanation was, well, quite strange. They cited a communications breach.
A communications breach?
Yeah, and then they went further, accusing Indian intelligence operatives of somehow being involved, trying to frame them, essentially.
That sounds convenient, like trying to muddy the waters after maybe realizing the backlash.
It does seem like a fairly standard tactic for groups like this, doesn't it? Claim responsibility for the initial impact, then deny if it proves strategically damaging or draws too much heat. The sources don't really give much credence to the retraction, given the initial claim and the other evidence pointing towards LeT.
Right, so while they retracted, the investigation pressed on. What did the NIA find?
They launched a major investigation, released sketches of 3 suspects, linked them to LeT, and suggested at least 2 were foreigners, likely Pakistani.
Did they find digital trails?
Apparently, yes. Digital forensics reportedly traced connections back to safe houses in Muzaffarabad and Karachi in Pakistan.
Suggesting coordination or support from across the border.
That's certainly the implication authorities are drawing. One of the named suspects, Hashim Musa, was even identified as potentially being a former member of Pakistan's paramilitary forces who later joined LeT.
And the scale of the investigation on the ground?
Huge. The NIA report mentioned questioning over 2,800 people.
2,800?
Yes. And over 150 were taken into custody, suspected OGWs, overground workers, collaborators, and people linked to banned groups like Jamaat-e-Islami and Hurriyat factions.
What about physical evidence?
They recovered over 40 cartridges from the scene. Ballistics, chemical analysis, all that is underway. They even did 3D mapping of the area, pulled tower dump data from mobile networks.
Trying to piece together movements, communication.
Exactly. And interestingly, there was a noted spike in satellite phone activity in that area in the days before the attack.
Suggesting pre-planning, coordination, perhaps?
It could point that way. And there were also reports, though less officially confirmed, of some retaliatory actions like the homes of suspected terrorists being bombed or demolished. A definite security crackdown followed.
While the investigation ramped up, what was happening right there, immediately after the attack? The rescue efforts.
Locals were crucial. They helped rescue people, offered shelter. Those pony handlers, besides Syed Adil Hussein Shah, were instrumental in getting injured tourists out using their ponies, makeshift stretchers. The terrain is difficult there.
That's important to highlight. The local community stepping up.
Absolutely. And gurdwaras, the Sikh places of worship, opened their doors to fleeing tourists, providing refuge.
A sign of solidarity.
Yes. Emergency services did respond, of course, and the critically injured were airlifted to the military hospital in Srinagar. And authorities set up a helpline for affected tourists pretty quickly.
And the reaction politically, socially.
Widespread condemnation within India, naturally. Leaders from across the political spectrum, Omar Abdullah, Rajnath Singh, Rahul Gandhi, Asaduddin Owaisi, all condemned it strongly.
And internationally.
Overwhelmingly condemnatory as well. Condolences and strong condemnations came from the UN, the EU, the US, Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, numerous countries.
What about Pakistan's reaction, given the allegations pointing towards LeT and potential links?
Initially, Pakistan's government dismissed the allegations. Their defense minister actually suggested it might be homegrown resistance, maybe even hinted at a false flag operation by India.
A false flag, that's a serious counteraccusation.
It is. And it's worth noting, this came shortly after Pakistan's army chief had made some strong statements about Kashmir being Pakistan's jugular vein, invoking the old two-nation theory. So the rhetoric was already quite heated.
Did any international bodies comment specifically on the religious targeting aspect?
Yes, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, specifically condemned the targeting of Hindus and other non-Muslims. They highlighted that element.
Now, this attack, beyond the immediate tragedy, the impact on Kashmir's tourism, that must have been huge.
Devastating, absolutely devastating. Kashmir's tourism had been picking up, growing quite a bit after the changes in 2019 with Article 370.
And this attack just slammed the brakes on it.
Completely. Mint reported mass cancellations. One figure mentioned was potentially 1.3 million bookings canceled just in August alone.
1.3 million? That's enormous.
It's a staggering number. Think about the financial hit. Hotels, taxi drivers, the shikara owners on Dal Lake, handicraft sellers, restaurants. So many livelihoods depend directly on tourism.
They must be in despair.
Reports quoted hoteliers and tour operators just expressing sheer despair, feeling like their livelihoods were snatched away overnight. There's immense fear among potential tourists now, obviously. Footfall dropped dramatically.
It's not just the loss of life, it's the economic lifeblood of the region being threatened.
Precisely. Economists are predicting a significant dent in the Union Territory's GDP because of this collapse in tourism.
To really understand why this kind of violence keeps happening, we probably need to look at the bigger picture, the context.
Yeah, the Kashmir conflict itself, its essential background.
It goes way back, right, to the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947.
Exactly. Dispute over the territory started immediately, led to wars, multiple wars between India and Pakistan.
In line to control the Lawsi, it's not really an international border, is it?
No, it's a ceasefire line, heavily militarized, and a constant flashpoint. Perspectives on Kashmir's rightful status differ fundamentally between India and Pakistan. And the promised plebiscite, the vote for people there to decide their future, never happened.
And out of this long conflict, militant groups emerged.
Yes, groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and, as we discussed, its proxy, TRF. India has consistently accused Pakistan's state apparatus, particularly the ISI, of backing these groups, training them, funding them.
And Pakistan's position on that?
Pakistan denies direct support. They usually say they only offer diplomatic and moral support to the Kashmiri people's struggle.
There's also the issue TRF mentioned in their initial claim, the demographic concerns after Article 370 was revoked.
Right. The change allowed non-Kashmiris to buy land and get domicile certificates, raising fears among some locals about altering the region's demographic makeup. That's definitely part of the complex political backdrop.
So, trying to piece together Pakistan's perspective from the sources. We have the initial denial of involvement in this specific attack.
Yes, and the defense minister's comments about homegrown resistance, or maybe a false flag.
Which seems to deflect blame.
Then there's the analysis, like in the Mohak Mangal video, about this idea of a discounted war.
What does that mean?
The idea that Pakistan might use low-cost terrorism, supporting militant groups, as a way to bleed India, to inflict damage and instability without engaging in full-scale conventional war, which would be incredibly costly for both sides.
That asymmetrical warfare.
Exactly. And tied into that is the stability-instability paradox.
Okay, what's that?
It's a concept in international relations, particularly relevant to nuclear-armed rivals like India and Pakistan. The thinking is that nuclear weapons make large-scale war unthinkable, creating a kind of stability at the highest level.
Right, mutually assured destruction, basically.
But that very stability at the top might paradoxically make lower-level conflicts, like proxy wars or supporting terrorism, seem less risky, because you assume the other side won't escalate all the way to nuclear war over it. It's like a form of nuclear blackmail, almost.
So using militancy under the nuclear umbrella.
That's the theory, yes. Whether it applies directly here is debated, but it's part of the strategic analysis some observers make.
And India's response to the Pahalgam attack.
Very strong condemnation, obviously, placing the blame squarely on Pakistan-based militants.
And actions followed.
Yes. Retaliatory measures were quite swift. We saw that wave of detentions, raids, the demolitions of homes of suspected militants or their families.
A hardline approach.
Seems so. Also, a temporary shutdown of tourism in some parts of Kashmir, which is understandable for security, but also adds to the economic pain. Some Pakistani nationals were expelled from India.
Diplomatically.
Steps were taken to downgrade ties. Further, talk of potentially pausing cooperation under the Indus Waters Treaty, a major water-sharing agreement, closing airspace to Pakistani aircraft, closing the main Wagah border crossing. These were all considered or implemented.
And trying to put financial pressure back on Pakistan.
Definitely. A renewed push to get Pakistan put back on the FATF gray list.
FATF, the Financial Action Task Force that monitors terror financing.
Correct. Highlighting Pakistan's alleged role in funding terror as justification for putting them back under that international scrutiny.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it feels like several key truths, or perhaps key facets of the truth, stand out.
I think so. First, the sheer horror of the attack, the deliberate targeting of civilians based on religion. That's undeniable.
Second, the absolutely devastating impact on the local economy, especially tourism, which affects so many ordinary Kashmiris.
Third, the immediate and significant flare-up in geopolitical tensions between India and Pakistan. The blame game, the retaliatory measures.
And fourth, these conflicting narratives about responsibility, the claim, the retraction, the allegations, and counter-allegations.
It all just highlights yet again how incredibly complex and deeply entrenched the Kashmir conflict is. The truth isn't simple. It involves understanding the immense human cost, the regional power plays, and that long, troubled history.
It really does. Which leaves us, and you listening, with a difficult thought, doesn't it?
I think so. In the wake of such brutalities, such targeted violence, how does a place like Kashmir even begin to rebuild trust? How do people find hope again?
And what does this specific tragedy tell us about the enduring nature of this conflict and just how fragile peace really is in that part of the world?
It's something to really reflect on the perspectives of those who lost loved ones, those whose livelihoods vanished, and the long shadow this casts over the future.